Hello, everybody. How are you? Wow, a packed room today. Last night, the Trump administration faced another example of judicial overreach. Using his full and proper legal authority, President Trump imposed universal tariffs and reciprocal tariffs on Liberation Day to address the extraordinary threat to our national security and economy posed by large and persistent annual U.S. goods trade deficits. The United States has run a trade deficit of goods every year since 1975. In 2024, our trade deficit in goods exceeded $1 trillion. Everybody agrees this is unacceptable. President Trump is delivering on his promise to fix this problem, and he has taken a long overdue and much needed bold stance for American workers after decades of our manufacturing base being hollowed out. The president's rationale for imposing these powerful tariffs was legally sound and grounded in common sense. President Trump correctly believes that America cannot function safely long-term if we are unable to scale advanced domestic manufacturing capacity, have our own secure critical supply chains, and our defense industrial base is dependent on foreign adversaries. Three judges of the U.S. Court of International Trade disagreed and brazenly abused their judicial power to usurp the authority of President Trump to stop him from carrying out the mandate that the American people gave him. These judges failed to acknowledge that the President of the United States has core foreign affairs powers and authority given to him by Congress to protect the United States economy and national security. Congress had created the National Emergency Act to provide the congressional framework to strike down improper IEEPA use. And any questions over whether President Trump improperly imposed these IEEPA tariffs were already adjudicated in Congress following Liberation Day. Congress firmly rejected an effort led by Senator Rand Paul and Democrats to terminate the president's reciprocal tariffs. The courts should have no role here. There is a troubling and dangerous trend of unelected judges inserting themselves into the presidential decision-making process. America cannot function if President Trump, or any other president for that matter, has their sensitive diplomatic or trade negotiations railroaded by activist judges. President Trump is in the process of rebalancing America's trading agreements with the entire world, bringing tens of billions of dollars in tariff revenues to our country, and finally ending the United States of America from being ripped off. These judges are threatening to undermine the credibility of the United States on the world stage. The administration has already filed an emergency motion for a stay pending appeal and an immediate administrative stay to strike down this egregious decision. But ultimately, the Supreme Court must put an end to this for the sake of our Constitution and our country.
Well, the ruling issued by that three-judge panel states that Trump does not have the power to issue sweeping tariffs across almost every country. Now, this panel of judges says that they do not agree with Trump's use of tariffs as leverage, citing that federal law we mentioned, IEEPA, saying that law does not allow it. Now, the White House is now in the process of appealing and responded to the ruling by saying this, quote, "It is not for unelected judges to decide how to properly address a national emergency. President Trump pledged to put America first, and the administration is committed to using every lever of executive power to address the crisis and restore American greatness." The White House's director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett, says he's confident that the tariff ruling will be overturned.
First, we're going to see what happens on appeal, and we're very confident in our success there because, after all, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Americans have died because of mostly Chinese fentanyl and Chinese fentanyl coming in from Mexico and Canada. And the idea that having more people die from fentanyl than died in the Vietnam War and that that's not an emergency, that we need to use every power that we have to try to address is ludicrous to me. There are different approaches that would take a couple of months to put these in place, and using procedures that have been approved in the past or approved in the last administration, but we're not planning to pursue those right now because we're very, very confident that this ruling is incorrect.
This will no doubt go to the Supreme Court, whether IEEPA allows for this, whether this classifies as a national emergency, in some ways analogous to the Alien Enemies Act and what classifies as an invasion. Lots of legal questions here. And Emily, as we look at this, you know, these were three judges. One was a Reagan appointee, one was a Trump appointee, one was an Obama appointee, and they were unanimous in this decision.
Right, and the senior judge, the one appointed by Reagan, said, look, it may be a very dandy plan, but it has to meet the statute. So I just want to walk listeners through exactly what the legal argument was that this decision was based on. So generally speaking, we know that Congress is usually responsible for tariffs, but there are carve-outs that give the executive branch and the president the specific powers. So first of all, this decision only applies to IEEPA. There were plenty of tariffs levied by the president under other statutes, under other authorities. So, for example, those 25% auto tariffs and the auto parts, that stands. Pharmaceuticals, that stands. So I just want everyone to understand this is sort of narrow in relation to that. And at the end of the day, the ruling was that, look, IEEPA doesn't authorize tariffs. It specifically mentions embargoes and sanctions only. And that even if it did, that this, as you pointed out, didn't qualify as an emergency, the judges argued. And they say, look, we've been living under this for 49 years. Why is it an emergency now? Now, the counter argument to that is just because it's sustained doesn't make it any less of an emergency, obviously. And what the White House argued, look, it's Congress that needs to make these political decisions, not these unelected judges. So, okay, what next? The White House has 10 days to implement stopping the tariffs under this specific thing. They can also enact, by the way, alternative tariffs under the other legal statutes and approved ways. They're obviously seeking an emergency stay and appealing. And then I think that the question that remains is whether this will impact the leverage that the White House has enjoyed in the negotiations with over 20 countries plus, by the other countries saying, well, wait, you can't enact these tariffs on us. Your own judges ruled that you can't. But again, I think the takeaway is it's narrowly applied to this one specific authority, that it's not done yet. This is one chapter in the long story. And that, no, this doesn't, in my opinion, erode the leverage and the strength that our president has in the ultimate question of tariffs and foreign diplomacy on the economic front.
I think Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, makes a great point. He calls this judicial tyranny. I don't think that's hyperbole. Because remember when a plane full of gang members was being sent out of our country and a judge, right, a district judge basically said, no, turn the plane around. We have to get this back. It's at the point where we're seeing judges stepping in places they don't seem to belong. For instance, like if Donald Trump launches a missile attack on the Houthis, is a judge going to jump in and say, no, turn the missile around because we say you should?
So, Emily, you had something?
Well, just a reminder, this is the administrative law judge world. And there are thousands of these judges throughout our country that actually do have a big impact on sort of multi-layers of life. We just don't hear about them often because it's not, as sexy as civil and criminal, but they do have a big impact. But that's why it shuttles out of this lane and into the federal lane for overview, which I think everyone's waiting for the adults to step in the room and make the determination.
We'll see what happens at the circuit court, probably going to the Supreme Court. We will keep you updated on all of that. And a reminder, 50% of the people think the nation's heading in the right direction. So positive news for the administration.
A long overdue. This reform is a long overdue change to the system. Hollowed out. The manufacturing sector in the city has been hollowed out. Legally sound. The contract was legally sound and enforceable. Grounded in common sense. His argument was grounded in common sense. Brazenly. He brazenly ignored the rules. Railroaded. He was railroaded through the trial without proper evidence. Egregious. The company committed egregious violations of safety regulations. Dandy. Everything is just dandy with the new plan. Hyperbole. Saying he can run a marathon in 10 minutes is pure hyperbole.
If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date with future videos. Thank you for watching.